Welcome to Outbreak Brief, the podcast that takes you inside the world's most dangerous infections.
Glad to be here for this one because it's a heavy topic today.
Yeah, it really is, because today we're tracking a microscopic villain that, well, it literally strangles its victims from the inside out. It poisons the heart, and it comes armed with a toxin so deadly it actually forced humanity to redefine modern medicine. Today's focus is on diphtheria.
Right. It's an infection that completely shaped public health as we know it today, but, it still remains this lurking threat that I think we underestimate at our own peril.
Oh, absolutely. And to really understand what we're up against, I want you to just step back in time with us for a second. Imagine it's the United States just before the 1920s.
A completely different world medically.
Completely. You are a parent, and there is this terrifying shadow hanging over your community. Every single winter, this mysterious illness sweeps through the neighborhood, causing, around 200,000 cases annually.
Yeah, and people back then actually called it the strangling angel of children.
The strangling angel,
Yeah.
which is just chilling. And the physical reality of it was pure, unadulterated horror. You look into your child's throat and see this thick, gray, leathery membrane growing.
It's horrific.
Right. Day by day, it just spreads, creeping down the airway and eventually suffocating them while they are wide awake.
Yeah, and the mortality statistics from that era are just brutal. Even today with all our modern medical knowledge, if you can track this specific infection and, you don't get specialized treatment, up to half of all patients will die.
Wow. 50%.
Yeah, it was an absolute terror before the era of widespread immunization. Just a nightmare for parents.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to fight a villain, you have to really know its profile. What exactly is the strangling angel?
Well, the culprit is a bacterium called Corynebacterium diphtheria. If you were to, say, look at a sample under a microscope, it presents as a non-modal gram-positive bacillus.
Okay, wait. Pause for a second.
Yeah.
Non-modal gram-positive bacillus sounds like a very dense medical textbook. So translate that for those of us who aren't, microbiologists. What does that actually mean for the human body?
Right. Let's break that down. A bacillus simply means it is a rod-shaped bacterium. Gram-positive refers to the structure of its cell wall. It basically has a very thick, rigid outer layer that absorbs a specific purple laboratory dye when we test it.
Okay, rod-shaped and thick-walled. Got it.
Exactly. And non-modal just means it cannot swim or move on its own. It doesn't have like little flagella or tails to propel itself to your bloodstream. It literally just lands in your throat and stays put.
So it just sits there. If it can't even move around, how is it capable of killing half the people it infects?
Because the bacteria itself isn't the primary killer. It acts more like a stationary factory. The real weapon is an exotoxin that the bacteria manufactures and then pumps out into the surrounding tissue.
But here's the craziest part of the research I found. The bacteria doesn't even naturally own the blueprint for this weapon, right?
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that this is one of the most incredible mechanisms in microbiology.
Yeah.
Corynebacterium diphtheria does not possess the genetic code to make this deadly toxin on its own.
Which is wild.
It really is. It actually acquires the blueprint from a viral bacteriophage.
A bacteriophage, so a virus.
Right. A bacteriophage is a virus that specifically infects bacteria. So in this case, a specialized virus infects the diphtheria bacteria, hacks into it, and permanently inserts the toxic genetic code into the bacteria's own DNA.
Wait, back up. You're saying the bacteria gets infected by a virus, and that viral infection is what turns the bacteria into a mass murderer. That sounds like science fiction.
It is a literal biochemical hijacking. Without that specific viral infection, the diphtheria bacteria is, it's mostly harmless. But once infected, it becomes a biological weapon.
Yeah, that's terrifying. So let's break down the stolen weapon. The toxin is a single polypeptide chain, but it has two distinct specialized parts, right? The A subunit and the B subunit. I sort of like to picture it as a highly trained microscopic assassination team pulling off a heist. The B subunit acts as the lockpick. Its entire job is to locate a specific receptor on the outside of your healthy human cell, bind to it, and force the cell membrane to open up.
And once the B subunit secures that entry point, it effectively holds the door open, allowing the A subunit, which is the actual assassin, to slip inside the cell.
And once the assassin is in, it is incredibly efficient at its job. From what I read, it seeks out a crucial cellular component called NAD and just physically cleaves it in half.
Right, and to understand how devastating that is, you have to know what NAD actually does. It stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide.
A mouthful.
Yeah, definitely. But it is a critical molecule that facilitates energy transfer and allows the cell to build proteins. You can think of it as the main power cord running to the cell's entire assembly line.
So the toxin breaks the power cord, it shuts the cell's assembly line dead in its tracks. And without the ability to synthesize new proteins, I mean, the cell can't repair itself, it can't function, and it simply dies. Multiply that by millions of cells, and you get massive local tissue destruction in the throat.
Yeah, the sheer lethality at a cellular level is just staggering. And this microscopic assassin truly shaped global history. Before the 1930s, there wasn't just a localized problem in, a few unlucky towns. Diphtheria was a relentless global scourge.
Yeah, the scope of it is hard to fathom today.
It is. Major hospitals around the world had entire massive wards dedicated solely to suffocating diphtheria patients, rows and rows of beds.
Just an absolute nightmare. But then humanity fought back, and we achieved a monumental turning point.
We did. The introduction of widespread vaccination completely changed the trajectory of human history here. Following some of the early vaccine developments, the World Health Organization launched the Essential Program on Immunization in 1974.
Right, the EPI.
Yeah, and that global coordinated effort to get vaccines into every corner of the world spectacularly dropped global diphtheria cases by over 90% between 1980 and 2000.
Over 90%. That's incredible.
It remains one of the greatest triumphs in the history of public health, honestly.
It's an incredible victory on paper, for sure. But looking at the data, it's also kind of a terrifying near miss. Because while we won a major battle, the war isn't actually over.
Not at all.
Right. If this toxin is so deadly once inside the body, the obvious question is how it manages to bypass our defenses and get inside us in the first place today.
Well, the transmission method is remarkably straightforward, which is what makes it highly insidious. It spreads primarily through airborne respiratory droplets.
Like a common cold.
Exactly like that. So if an infected person coughs, sneezes, or even just talks animatedly in close proximity to you, you can breathe in the bacteria. You can also contract it by physically touching the open sores or ulcers of an infected person.
Okay, so once you are exposed, the incubation period is a very tense waiting game. It usually takes just 2 to 5 days before the first symptoms start to emerge.
Very fast.
Yeah. But wait, so how long is someone actually contagious? Like if someone catches it, how long are they a walking biohazard to the people around them?
That's the scary part. Without heavy antibiotic treatment, a person can shed the bacteria and remain highly contagious for 2 to 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah. And human beings are the exclusive hosts for this organism. It doesn't live in birds or pigs or soil. It relies entirely on us.
Which brings up the most unsettling fact I found in the research. It doesn't always make us sick. You can have asymptomatic carriers.
Right, exactly.
People who harbor the bacteria in their respiratory tract feel perfectly fine but act as invisible vectors. They silently keep the bacteria alive and circulating in the population, coughing it onto subway poles or breathing it onto their coworkers.
They are the quiet reservoirs of the disease. They're the reason it never truly vanishes.
Which really makes you realize, if healthy-looking people are silently walking around with this, who is actually in the crosshairs? Who gets hit the hardest when the bacteria finally finds a new vulnerable victim?
The primary victims are inevitably the unvaccinated and the undervaccinated. From a demographic perspective, children under 5 are highly vulnerable simply because their immune systems are still developing. But surprisingly, adults over 40 are also a massive risk group.
Wait, really? Why adults over 40? You'd think adults would have the strongest immune systems, right?
You'd think so, but the vulnerability comes down to waning immunity. The protective antibodies your body produces after receiving the childhood vaccine, well, they don't last forever. They degrade over time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If you aren't keeping up with your adult booster shots, the specific memory B cells that recognize the diphtheria toxin gradually die off, or just forget the pathogen.
It's like having an old wanted poster hanging up in a post office.
Yes, exactly.
Over 10 or 20 years, the ink fades, the paper yellows, and eventually your immune system's security guards just don't recognize the intruder anymore when it walks right through the front door.
The faded wanted poster is the perfect way to look at it. The pathogen slips past entirely unnoticed. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, beyond just age, socioeconomic factors are the true drivers of modern outbreaks.
How so?
Well, this bacterium thrives in overcrowded conditions where people are forced to live in tight quarters with poor sanitation. We see outbreaks tear through military barracks, overcrowded jails, and tragically, populations displaced by conflict or natural disasters where the health infrastructure has completely collapsed.
Yeah, I read the reports on the 2017 outbreak in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, and it is a devastating example of
It
this.
really was a tragedy.
You had hundreds of thousands of highly vulnerable, displaced people living in incredibly dense, stressful conditions without routine medical care. It was the absolute perfect storm, and the disease just tore through the camps, mostly attacking the children.
It's a stark reminder that public health is intrinsically linked to human living conditions. You can't separate the two.
No, you really can't. So let's say the absolute worst happens. An unvaccinated person is exposed. The short incubation period ends. Walk us through the onset. What does this disease actually feel like?
It starts deceptively mild. A patient might think they just caught a standard winter cold. They will experience a low-grade fever, some general malaise, and a sore throat.
Pretty standard stuff so far.
Right. But quickly, they will develop swollen neck glands, an extreme cervical lymphadenopathy that creates what medical professionals historically call a bull neck appearance.
A bull neck.
Yeah, where the neck swells so much it becomes completely flush with the jawline.
Wow. But then comes the hallmark of the disease, the pseudomembrane.
Yes, the pseudomembrane.
This isn't just a layer of mucus or a standard sore throat. Because the toxin is actively cutting the power to your cells, it forms this thick, gray, leathery coating over your tonsils, your pharynx, and sometimes right over your airway.
It's terrible.
It's a literal wall made of dead tissue, clumping white blood cells, red blood cells, and the thriving bacteria itself.
And the structural integrity of that membrane is incredibly resilient. It anchors itself deeply into the living tissue of the throat.
This is the part of the medical literature that literally makes me shudder. Because if a doctor looks into the throat and tries to, scrape that gray membrane away with a swab to help the patient breathe, the underlying tissue immediately starts to hemorrhage and bleed.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's essentially a toxic living scab firmly rooted in the airway.
Exactly. The bleeding happens because the capillaries are deeply entangled with the necrotic tissue. And the membrane isn't the only localized threat, by the way. It can physically grow so thick that it completely obstructs the airway, causing mechanical suffocation.
Right, the strangling angel.
But the horror really becomes systemic when the exotoxin eventually leaks out of the throat tissue and enters the lymphatic system and the bloodstream.
So the assassin gets out of the local neighborhood and into the city's main transit system.
Precisely. And once it goes systemic, it doesn't just attack randomly. It has a high affinity for specific organs, primarily the heart. It binds to the cardiac tissue, causing severe myocarditis.
So it's actively attacking the heart muscle.
Yes, we're talking about congestive heart failure, circulatory collapse, and life-threatening arrhythmias like complete heart block, where the electrical signals of the heart just fail entirely.
Wait, why the heart and nerves specifically? Does the toxin just prefer those areas?
It's about receptors. The cells in our heart muscle and our peripheral nervous system have a very high concentration of the specific surface receptors that the toxins B subunit, your lockpick, is actively looking for.
Ah, I see.
It binds to them rapidly. So in the nervous system, it causes polyneuropathy.
And from what I read, the nerve damage is so severe that patients experience actual paralysis.
Yes.
Sometimes the muscles of the soft palate and pharynx are paralyzed to the point where a patient trying to drink water will actually regurgitate the fluid straight out through their nose because the swallowing mechanism is completely destroyed.
It's a total system collapse.
Just horrifying. And we should also briefly mention the cutaneous form, correct?
Oh, right. Cutaneous diphtheria occurs when the bacteria infects the skin rather than the throat, often at the site of a pre-existing minor scratch or injury.
So it doesn't even need to be inhaled.
Nope. And it forms these deep, ulcerating, very slow-healing skin lesions that are also covered by a miniature version of that gray membrane. While it's less likely to cause the severe systemic heart and nerve complications of respiratory diphtheria, the skin lesions are highly contagious to anyone who touches them.
Okay, so you have a patient suffocating from a pseudomembrane, their heart is going into block, their nerves are shutting down. The treatment for this has to be one of the most intense, high-stakes medical emergencies imaginable.
It is an absolute race against the clock. If a clinician suspects respiratory diphtheria based on that gray membrane and the bull neck, they cannot wait for the lab tests to confirm it.
Too slow.
Way too slow. Culturing the bacteria takes days, and time is the one thing the patient absolutely does not have. The medical team has to act immediately based on clinical judgment alone.
And the primary antidote sounds like something straight out of the 19th century because Well, it kind of is. It's diphtheria antitoxin or yeah,
DTaP is derived directly from horse antiserum.
which is wild.
It really is. The production involves hyper-immunizing horses with the diphtheria toxoid, then safely harvesting their blood to extract the massive amounts of antibodies their bodies produce.
Wait, horses? I mean, why are we using horses to treat a human respiratory disease in the 21st century? Why not synthesize it or use smaller animals?
It's a matter of volume. Horses have massive blood volumes and incredibly robust immune systems. We can safely draw large quantities of blood from a single horse, yielding enough antibodies to treat many human patients without harming the animal.
Oh, that makes sense.
However, because these are equine antibodies, injecting them into a human carries a significant risk of severe allergic reactions, including fatal anaphylactic shock.
So the cure could kill you.
It's a real risk. Doctors have to perform careful hypersensitivity testing first, and they must have emergency epinephrine drawn up and ready at the bedside just in case.
But here's the most terrifying catch in this whole treatment scenario. That powerful horse antitoxin. It only neutralizes the unbound toxin floating freely in the human blood.
Right.
If the toxin's B subunit has already picked the lock on a heart cell, and the A subunit is already inside cutting the power, the antitoxin is completely useless. It cannot penetrate the cell to reverse the damage already done.
Which is why early administration is the only way to save lives. It basically mops up the circulating poison before it can breach more healthy cells.
Yeah.
But, the antitoxin doesn't kill the bacteria itself. It only fights the weapon.
Yeah, we need a cleanup crew.
Exactly.
That's the second prong of the attack. Heavy-duty antibiotics. Usually erythromycin or penicillin G. The antibiotics kill the actual Corynebacterium, which stops the factory from producing any more toxin. Plus, it has a massive public health benefit for the community.
Yeah, once a patient starts the appropriate antibiotics, they generally stop being contagious to others within about 48 hours. It effectively shuts down the transmission chain.
It's an intense, brutal fight to save a life once infected, which is why preventing the infection in the first place feels like an absolute miracle of modern science. How do we build a defense before the bacteria even arrives?
The defense relies entirely on the toxoid vaccine.
And the toxoid vaccine is brilliant because it doesn't just teach your body to fight the bacteria, it uses a chemically deactivated version of the toxin itself.
Yes, that's the key.
It trains your immune system to recognize and neutralize the poison. It builds the shield against the weapon, not just the vehicle carrying it.
We have an excellent arsenal of toxoid vaccines today, thankfully. It's usually administered in combination with tetanus and pertussis vaccines. We use DTaP for babies and young children, Tdap for preteens, teens, and pregnant women, which critically helps protect vulnerable newborns, and Tdap for adult boosters.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this and trying to remember the last time you got a tetanus shot, you're not alone. Most of us completely forget about this as adults.
We really do.
But that 10-year booster is the literal clock on your immunity. If you are an adult, you must get that booster every 10 years, or your wanted poster fades, and your shield drops completely.
And on a broader public health level, maintaining that shield across the entire population is how we prevent those asymptomatic carriers from starting outbreaks. Because when a single case of active diphtheria is identified today, it triggers an immediate, heavy-duty public health war.
It's a full-scale lockdown, strict isolation for the patient, intense droplet precautions for the healthcare workers, meaning N95, masks, gowns, gloves, and massive contact tracing.
Oh yeah, they leave no stone unturned.
Public health officials have to find every single person the patient interacted with while contagious.
And those close contacts don't just wait around to see if they develop a sore throat. They are immediately given a prophylactic dose of antibiotics, either penicillin G or erythromycin, to kill any bacteria they might have inhaled, and their vaccination status is aggressively updated on the spot.
I find the lab work behind the scenes of this containment to be strangely fascinating, actually. When they swab all those contacts and send the samples to the lab, the microbiologists grow them on highly specific nutrient plates, like Loeffler medium or Tyndale medium.
Right, the Tyndale medium is classic.
Yeah, and on that Tyndale medium, the diphtheria bacteria interact with potassium tellurite in the gel and reveal themselves as these sinister, pitch-black colonies surrounded by dark brown halos. It literally looks like the villain it is under the microscope.
It's a highly distinctive diagnostic marker that confirms the presence of the exact pathogen. So, looking at the big picture today, where do we actually stand in this ongoing war?
Well, it requires a global reality check. In the U.S., cases are incredibly rare now. We might see a handful a year, and they are almost always linked to international travel by an unvaccinated individual. But globally, the threat is very much alive.
Very much so.
It persists heavily in regions of Southeast Asia and Africa, with India unfortunately carrying a significant burden of the global cases, largely due to the sheer logistical challenges of vaccinating such a massive rural population.
Yeah, and the latest surveillance data from the World Health Organization gives us a pretty clear picture of the precipice we are standing on. In 2023, an estimated 84% of children worldwide received their recommended 3 doses of the vaccine.
I mean, 84% sounds like a solid B grade. It sounds pretty good on the surface.
It is an achievement for sure, but the chilling math is in the remainder. That leaves 16% of the global population, tens of millions of children, completely unprotected. And when you combine that massive gap with the severe setbacks and routine day-to-day immunizations caused by the disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have an enormous amount of dry tinder accumulating around the world.
The conditions for a massive outbreak are literally just sitting there waiting for a spark in a vulnerable community. Which brings us to the future. What are the public health experts losing sleep over right now?
There are 2 major looming threats that researchers are urgently monitoring. First is antimicrobial resistance.
Of course.
Yeah, we are seeing certain strains of diphtheria in recent outbreaks exhibiting resistance to the common antibiotics we rely on to stop transmission. If we lose the ability to clear the bacteria quickly with erythromycin or penicillin, the contagious window stays open longer and the spread becomes exponentially harder to stop.
And the second threat is our absolute reliance on a treatment method from a bygone era, right?
The diphtheria antitoxin, the DTaP. Because severe diphtheria is so rare in wealthy nations, pharmaceutical companies don't commercially produce the horse antitoxin anymore. There's just no profit in it.
That's incredibly dangerous.
It is. It's difficult and expensive to maintain the hyper-immunized horses required to harvest the serum. In the U.S., a hospital can't just order it from a local pharmacy. It requires an emergency, highly coordinated release from the CDC's strategic stockpiles. It is a very precarious bottleneck in our emergency response system.
It really makes you realize how fragile our safety net actually is. Which leads me to this final, somewhat haunting thought I want you to mull over today. We conquered the strangling angel of the 1920s with brilliant science, but we didn't eliminate it from the earth.
No, we didn't.
The bacteria hasn't gone anywhere. It is still out there, living silently in the throats of asymptomatic carriers, traveling on airplanes, walking through grocery stores, riding the subway. The only thing standing between you and the horrific reality of a century ago is an invisible collective shield of immunological memory. If we forget our history, and if we forget to update those faded wanted posters with our boosters, well, the villain is just waiting in the wings.
It's a powerful reminder that in the fight against infectious disease, victory is never final. It requires constant generational vigilance.
Stay informed. Stay prepared. This has been Outbreak Brief.